Thank you, Javier. Thank you for having me here today. I'm a little bit nervous because in my culture, I was taught to be afraid of teachers. So when I was going to do this talk on EDTalks, I couldn't sleep for days. And so I'm going to use my notes if that's okay with all of you. Actually, how many of you are teachers in here? Okay, so not too many. What about the others? Are you administrators? School board. Oh, that's scary too, okay. Well, I'm glad that there's not that many teachers. I was sleepless for no reason. I want to start this conversation by talking a little bit about who I am. And I'm going to hone in on just Asian American population, right? Because we often talk about who are Minnesotans, but we never talk about the specific community. So today I'm going to talk about that. And I want to talk about why data disaggregation is so important. So my name is KaYing, but I want you to say it the correct way, right? Because I feel like as immigrants and refugees, we come to this country and we butcher our own name to make it convenient for you, right? So today I'm going to ask you to say it the way I say it in Hmong, or actually Hmong is a tonal language. We have 8 tones. Any of you speak Mandarin in the audience? No one. Oh, Mandarin. Mandarin has only 4 tones, so sorry, big country, but Hmong people have no country, but we have 8 tones, so that's the asset that I bring here, right? So it's a tonal language. So in Hmong, my name is spelled Kaab. So how would you pronounce that in English? Kab, right? And then my middle name is Ying, Yeeb, so it's Kabyib, right? And my last name is spelled Yaaj, so Kabyib Yaj, right? But that's not true. The last letter is a tone marker, so B is the highest tone. So can you say gang? Gang. Sing it, it's a tonal language. That's what music teachers always do, right? KaYing. Yang. KaYing yang. Okay, I feel less nervous now. Isn't that beautiful? And now when I introduce myself, I say, my name is KaYing Yang. Horrible, right? But this is cultural competency, right? I often yell at other Hmong millennials, why do you have to butcher your name? You're not Du Che Zong. Nobody knows what Du Che Zong is. It's Dun Che Xiong, right? Or KaYing Yang, or Cong Wang. See how beautiful that is? These are the assets that we bring to the state of Minnesota, but because we're so eager to adapt and to acculturate, that we quickly forget them to make it convenient for all of you and for all of us, right? I know not every community does that, but I know that in the Hmong community, we often do that because we want to create harmony. Well, harmony this, harmony that, right? Then at the end of the day, we're the ones that's not living in harmony, right? So my name is KaYing Yang, and I came to this country in 1976 to Columbus, Ohio. I was 7 years old. I came with my mom and dad, and my mom and dad, like all other Hmong families, brought 3 other cousin brothers with them because they didn't have any parents at that time. So the only way to come to this country was to be attached to a family unit. So my dad said they were his brothers and we brought them together. Otherwise, they would be orphaned and left behind in refugee camps in Thailand and or deported back to Laos after the war. My father was a soldier for the CIA. How many of you have been watching Obama visiting Laos? You better raise your hand, yeah? Okay, there's a huge connection to Minnesota. So the majority of the Hmong people in Minnesota are from Laos. And the reason we're here is because people like my father, who at that time was a teenager, was recruited by the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, not the Culinary Institute of what, cuisine or something. So he actually only had a 5th grade education, which is very common in many Hmong people from that generation in Laos, mainly because Hmong people lived in the remote areas of Laos, right? So access to education was very difficult. But he was lucky enough to be sent into the city to go to school, and then eventually recruited, like all the men in our community, by the CIA to fight as foot soldiers for the Americans who was carrying out a secret war in Laos. Eventually, because of his bravery, he earned a rank of lieutenant colonel. And he went and married my mother, who is a village girl in the mountains of Laos. My mother has never held a pencil or pen or a piece of paper until she came to Columbus, Ohio in 1976. But because she was a wife of a lieutenant colonel, she had certain privileges, right? So you can imagine my family. I'm telling you my family because I know that many refugees and immigrants have the same experience, right? My father's first job was a janitor, not a senator, a janitor, would have been in your union probably, at a hospital. So imagine that, right? From a lieutenant colonel with bodyguards to becoming a janitor at a hospital. Even though it's a great job, the morale, of course, was very harsh on him, right? And my mother, who was a lieutenant colonel's wife, although she had no education, lived in poverty, came to this country and became a maid at the Ramadan Inn. To this day, her bed is always made very well, and her apartment is very clean. So for a young child of 7 years old, I knew something was wrong, and I remember the experience of crossing the Great Mekong River to come to the refugee camps into the United States. My first 2 English words were yes and no, and when I was 7, I was placed in the 3rd grade. I don't think that there were any ESL or EL programs back then. So they put me in the appropriate age grade, I suppose. So when people asked me what was my name, I just said yes. And when they said, how are you, I just said no. And I used those words for a few weeks. But the only things I remember from those days was that a college student who looked Asian came and was our tutor for many, many months. But I didn't remember anyone else from that period. I remember one other little girl who pulled my hair every single day because at that time I had long hair to my butt. So those are the 2 clear memories I have about my experience in Columbus, Ohio when I was 7 years old in the 3rd grade, right? And so I want to tell you this story so that you know who I am. And I want to tell you what Ruth was saying. The data doesn't tell you and us about the problems and the concerns and the traumas that we face. So in the classroom, I only know yes or no, and I have lots of challenges, but when I get home, I also see my parents suffering, right? And the loss of status, the loss of just self-respect, and the loss of home and loss of family and heritage. So even though I was 7 years old, this was very prominent in my mind. And to this day, I think I am traumatized by it too. So that's why when I talk like this, I feel like I'm going to be tearful, but I'll try not to be. So as teachers, I know that you have to care about the child, right? And everything about the child in order for that child to be successful. And so I think I became an advocate mainly because I've seen my family go through this process as refugees. And in fact, when we talk about secondary migration, my parents came to Columbus, Ohio. We were sponsored by a Catholic church. But we couldn't stay there because the Hmong family were very few, and we needed to be in a community where we had the social structure and support that we needed. So we moved to Wisconsin, Manitowoc, Wisconsin, to be precise. And so that was another very interesting experience. So when we talk about data disaggregation and data, Ruth and I met and we talked a little bit, but I want to say that the Coalition of Asian American Leaders and Compass actually had opportunities to work together before we created CAL. And the reason we did this is because, as all nonprofits experience, we don't have the funding to do our own research. So we have to collect and analyze other people's research in order to make a case for us. And the reason we needed to make a case is because we often see data like this, right? How many of you have seen things like this, where you see Asian, the category of Asian, here? This is individuals below the poverty level by racial and ethnic group. So when we see the aggregate Asian here, we are not doing so badly, right, compared to all Minnesotans, about 10%. But when I see this data, I don't see myself in that data. I don't see my mom, I don't see my neighbors. I don't see this at all, right? But this is what policymakers see. This is what decision makers see. The next data here, I purposely made it small so you don't have to see the numbers, but I want to make a case, right? This is median household income for Asians. Look at how well they're doing. Even better than Minnesotans, right? Nearly 80,000, maybe 70,000 here, median income. Now, does that look like the data that Bruce just showed you before? No, right? So again, when we see this kind of data, we said Asian Americans have no needs, no issues, and we're left at that. But as soon as you start separating the communities, right? Here, Asians, Southeast Asians, and other Asians, right? It's still a very big category. But look at the stark difference here. Almost 50% difference, right? Median household income. So this is the reason why data disaggregation is so important to us, because it doesn't tell the whole story. And for, oh, am I supposed to point in here? And here is graduation rates. This is the scariest one of all, right? Asians are graduating just as, is it right here? Just like any other community, right? Oftentimes, I'm an advocate now, and I go to school and I say, how are our Asian students doing? Oh, they're so well behaved, they're graduating, they're valedictorians, right? Yes, maybe there are exceptions, but that's not true for everyone. So the purpose of this discussion is that usually when I go to meetings and conferences or even talk to policymakers, these are the 3 types of charts that I see, right? And then no one ever talks about Asian Americans again, because people are afraid to bring it up, because well, look at that, they have no needs, right? Even I'm afraid to bring it up because I don't have the disaggregated data in my hand to say, look, that data is not complete, right? So this is why at Coalition of Asian American Leaders, we are so adamant about data disaggregation. When widely accepted aggregated data hides economic insecurity experienced by ethnic and subpopulations within Minnesota's Asian population. For example, an estimated 37,000 Asian Minnesotan adults live under the poverty line, of which 29,000 are Southeast Asians. This makes me think about my mom and my dad. They're one of these 29,000 people, right? They live from day to day. In the summertime, they have gardens, and that's all they eat, is the vegetables from the garden. And maybe they'll go buy chicken or pork to eat with that. That's how they're surviving. We don't have investments. We don't have 501k. Who does that? They worked at a Ramada Inn, and they worked as janitor. And they didn't work there for very long, right? So what is the retirement plan for them? I am the retirement plan, right? When lumped together into the aggregate data of Asians, our community disparities become hidden, okay? And this is true for Asian Americans. So how do we use data to build voice and visibility together to achieve equity? For Asian Minnesotans, ensuring that our inclusion and equity discussions means having the ability to see and understand nuanced data. And I use the word equity because it's really equity, okay? It's not just about learning about our community, but to have equity, we need to have data disaggregation. So again, when we talk about the individual, what we know about ourselves is not what data tells us, right? But since we've been working with Compass and we live in a society that's data-driven, we know that it's very important to have both, right? And so we're trying to change about how we do business. So who are Asian Americans? How many of you in here are Asian Americans? Can you raise your hand? I can't assume, I don't know, so. We are the fastest growing community in the state and in the country. And since 2000, our population has grown by 53% in Minnesota to about 256,000 strong, made up of 40 cultural communities. And Asian Americans comprise the state's youngest population with a median age of 29, significantly younger than the average Minnesotan age of 38. And from 2010 to 2014, Asian Americans added 26,000 people to the working age population, while 35,000 white Minnesotans went into retirement age. I don't know if that scares you or makes you happy. But as educators, I hope that we did a good job educating those folks who went into the workforce, right? Unlike any other community in the United States, 60% of our Asian population are Southeast Asians who are refugees or descendants of refugees, like me, okay? This is unlike any other state, as I said before. And the majority of Asians in Minnesota are Hmong, Vietnamese, Asian Indian, Chinese, Cambodian, Korean. 60% are foreign-born, Nepali, Burmese, and Asian Indian, and 40% are native-born, Japanese, Hmong. The Hmong community is one of the youngest here, too, in Minnesota. And there are 72% that are citizens, Khmer, Korean, Vietnamese, and then 28 that are not citizens. So we have a strong voting bloc, right? And I was just talking to Pahua about how we need to activate that voting bloc. Most commonly spoken Asian languages in Minnesota are Vietnamese, Hmong, Lao, Chinese, Hindi. I know Ruth talked about this a little bit, but my graph is prettier than hers, right? My chart. I'm not a data freak, that's why. And for those of you who are educators, 49% of our Asian students are concentrated in the Twin Cities, in Hennepin suburbs and in St. Paul Public School. And these are the languages spoken at home: Karen, Mandarin, Khmer, and Hmong, Vietnamese. In some school districts, Asian Americans make up 30% of the student population, yet there are no Asian cabinet-level leaders. The US Department of Education asserts that Minnesota's overall on-time graduation rates for all students of color across all racial lines puts it directly at the bottom of all 50 states. Asian American students rank 46 out of 50 for on-time graduation. When I looked at that, I thought, well, 82% is pretty high. But when I looked at the other states, it's like 90%, right? So I didn't realize that when you compare, what a stark difference that is. And the 20%, right? So here, 18% do not graduate high school on time. Students with limited English proficiency, there's 36%. We could not disaggregate that data, so we use that data. And then Hennepin County suburbs, 16%. And St. Paul Public Schools, 22%. We use this data because we know that the large majority of Asians in St. Paul School are most likely Hmong students. So this is how we use the data for advocacy purposes. In addition to Minnesota, which holds the highest average ACT score in the nation of 23, Asian students, even at the aggregate level, hold a score of 18. So even though we're graduating our students, they're not proficient, right? And they're not going to do well in college. How many of you knew that already? Good, the school board member knew that. So I just wanted to highlight the numbers of LEP students who do not graduate from school, and we need to focus more support for ELO students, right? These numbers, there's a lot of numbers here, but I just want you to take a look at the numbers of Asians who meet or exceed third grade reading standards, right? 49% meet it, but 51% don't even meet third grade reading standards. And for LEP students, 77% don't meet third grade reading proficiency. Hennepin County, 47, and St. Paul, 73. These numbers are very high. And yet we boast that we have high graduation rates, right? And I worry about this. And if they're going to a workforce, what kind of workforce are they going into? And what is the economy of Minnesota going to look like in the next 10, 20 years, right? Eighth grade math. It looks a little bit better. 63% of all Asians meet or exceed 8th grade math. But when we break it down, 37% do not. And look at the limited English proficiency again, 76%. Hennepin County, 28%. And St. Paul Public Schools, 57%. I don't know, it's not moving, okay. Okay. So unfortunately, neither the US or the Minnesota Department of Education require data collection beyond the aggregate label of Asian until now. We passed some bills last year. Therefore, data for specific ethnic communities is not available across the state or at major school districts. And people have said to me, that's not true. We collect it, but we don't know what to do with it. So we don't have the funding to analyze it and to use it publicly because it's not required, right? So even though without data disaggregation, we as a community understand that for many of our children are being pushed out of schools without being college ready. Available quantitative data combined with qualitative data shows these following themes. We took it into our own hands to say we need to talk to our community, right? The families and students have challenges navigating the system. I think most of the time our current students, they're being pushed out of the system. They are graduating high school, but graduating without having much ability to move on to community college or four-year college. The Karen community is our newest community in the Asian American community, right? They come from Burma. And just this year, one of the staff said they have 3,000 Karens in the St. Paul School District. Many students are invisible from the core curriculum. Asian kids are very invisible. Many of them are hungry for role models. Asian students are not included in so much the curriculum. And we want you to see our language as an asset. I just taught you how to say my name, and didn't you feel good about that? Well, we want everyone to feel good about that. I was not really encouraged to honor my language. That encouragement was coming from my family members, but it wasn't coming from my schools. I believe that our young people need to see themselves in their education. Student engagement and social isolation. My worst memory is the feeling of how I couldn't articulate discrimination. I couldn't describe it. I knew sometimes things were not fair, but I didn't know why. I didn't know the context of marginalization. I felt I did the same as other students in high school, but got treated differently. And teacher diversity. I know there's a huge movement on teacher diversity, but we also see it in our community. At the end of the day, it helps kids almost more than anything to have somebody in front of the classroom that looks like them or understands their experiences. It's not getting special attention. It's giving recognition to the unique circumstances and cultures and responsibilities. It encourages the kid to perform better, study harder. Do you remember what I said about being Columbus and I remember the tutor? And I remember the girl who was bullying me? Those are the two memories. Those things are engraved in your mind forever, right? And race-based ELL placement in St. Paul Public Schools. And other schools too, but the school district needs to ensure that ELL parents understand their rights. If I speak another language other than English, then automatically my children are coded as ELL. To get them out of that track is challenging. Even if we refuse these services, the education system keeps testing them in EL, and it's a waste of time. Remember when I said data is not disaggregated? So home language is one way to figure out who the students are, right? And many of us are so proud to say we're Hmong, even though there's no box to say you're Hmong, we say we speak Hmong just so that we can be counted. But when we do that, then it labels our child, and potentially he or she will become tracked into EL. And I'm not against EL, but I think that we need to think about how EL can be better and quality education for those students who are there when we see how many of them are not graduating, right? So we are not surprised to hear about any of these issues, unfortunately. When we see too many US-born Asian Americans placed in EL or English, despite the fact that English is their first language. If they're born here, we only speak English to them, right? Or when there is one Asian teacher for every 70 Asian students in schools, right? When there are 0 Asian Americans in cabinet level positions at school districts. Our problems are clearly systemic. Would you agree with me? And we need to address these deeper issues in meaningful ways, and in part, this requires data disaggregation. I understand the limitations and challenges of data disaggregation due to population size, data collection and sampling methods, and data management and systems capacity. Many people tell us that they can't do it. It costs too much, yeah? But we also, as an advocate, support efforts to properly fund these data disaggregation work so that people and organizations have resources and capacity to conduct good implementation, so that legislators, educators, and decision makers have accurate data. But most importantly, for community members who are most affected by these data to be able to use the information about their community for their own benefit. If these students can't even use this data to advocate for themselves, then what's the point of data, right? So Asian Americans are diverse, and we believe that both proactively understanding the challenges of our community and simultaneously building on our community's assets is essential to achieving equity. So that's my presentation for today. Thank you very much.